Welcome to another segment of ACRP TV. Today, our spotlight is on leveraging data to improve patient recruitment, a very important topic. Got a good guest with us today, Dr. Jason Bhan, who's the Chief Medical Information Officer and co-founder at Prognos. Dr. Bhan, Jason, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, this is a big topic. Obviously, we've only got a few minutes. So you and I were talking earlier. We're going to stay high level and kind of narrow it down. But let's first talk about vis-a-vis clinical trials, the issue of data access, because that's an important one and very complicated.
Yeah, I mean, data is effectively in silos all over in systems, and those systems are things from a provider's office electronic health record to a hospital system and their health records, to individual labs, to radiology departments, to radiology limb systems. So basically, what we deal with is gaining access to the types of information that you need to make clinical trial recruitment effective. So really, it's about breaking down some of these silos or going in and extracting from all of these silos. And if you can imagine, there are, something like 5,000 some odd hospitals in the United States, each of those with their own implementation of a health record system or lab information system or PACS for the radiology system. So, and each one is different. And so one implementation is one implementation. We used to have a joke with when you saw one EHR, you've seen one EHR. Fields are labeled differently. And extracting that data is not easy. So that is one major issue that we deal with in all healthcare data, in the whole healthcare data space, which is access to data.
Now let's talk about, in a broad sense, how getting this right can help. I think you and I were talking last week. I think it was about a leukemia trial or something, and we obviously don't have to get very specific, but if you can talk about ways that being able to, burrow into the data, be more proactive, make the data work for you and better understand it, and not just take in a deluge of data, but maybe if you can talk about how people can leverage this data to improve patient recruitment.
Sure. So once you get past the access problem, which, is trying to access that clinical data, but also all the other types of data that are available in the system. There's a lot of transactional data out there, claims data, prescription claims, medical claims, prescription specific data. So once you get the types of data that you're interested in, I kind of break down the recruitment, clinical trial recruitment piece into two parts. One is making sure that your inclusion-exclusion criteria are giving you a broad enough funnel to start with, right? So a lot of times we're doing this in the blind, where we just sort of look at, a bunch of patients and try to come up with the right inclusion-exclusion criteria. Do they have elevated labs for this particular test? Have they had this diagnosis before? Have they been on this drug before? And without really being able to sift and sort through a broad population, the entire population of the US, sort of from a health data perspective, you end up making your funnel very narrow to start. Then, you're faced with, okay, it's really hard to go backwards from your inclusion-exclusion criteria and continuously expand them once you've initiated your trial. So having some knowledge up front as to how inclusion-exclusion criteria impact the top of the funnel, top of your recruitment funnel is pretty important. So using broad-scale data that is accessible, much more readily accessible, like some of the clinical lab data, claims data arcs that I mentioned, is really helpful for that. So that's sort of part one. Part two is now, how do you find those patients? Right, so that's a really complicated problem, and you can still use the same type of data that is used for sort of funnel analysis for your clinical trial to actually to find pockets of these patients, right? So you may not be able to identify them down to the individual level, but you can find the doctor's offices or the doctors who have high populations of these patients. And then you can go and reach out to them, and whether they become a clinical trial site, or they're become a recruiting center for you. That is actually another really powerful way to leverage the data assets that are available and not highly siloed to improve recruitment for clinical trials.
Now, the clinical trial industry has a reputation, and I can understand why. It makes sense because this is life or death. It's very serious. But they're not, generally speaking, early adopters when it comes to technology. But do you see that there's a greater awareness of this issue and more of an embrace of technology to help improve on this here?
Yeah, a clinical trial recruitment is probably like the recruitment phase of a clinical trial is probably the single most important differentiator in all of the different clinical trial CROs that are out there, or pharma companies that are running clinical trials. So yes, absolutely. They are looking for more sophisticated, more interesting, and more accurate ways of identifying patients and leveraging data to do that. We've, at Prognos, we've done a number of different, had a number of different discussions and done some deals with companies for that specifically.
Excellent. This has been our ACRP TV spotlight on leveraging data to improve patient recruitment. We've been speaking with Dr. Jason Bhan, the Chief Medical Information Officer and co-founder of Prognos. Jason, thanks again for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Nice to see you.